They laughed when you stayed quiet, when you hesitated, when you said less and watched more. They called you slow, navvy, out of place, like you didn't belong in the room. You remember the sting of it, don't you? Every smirk that told you you'd never be enough. Every moment your silence was mistaken for ignorant. But what they never understood was that silence was never your weakness. It was your weapon sharpening in the dark. You weren't dumb. You were collecting data. Every insult, every dismissal, every careless whisper about you became a note in your mental ledger. You were mapping their patterns while they underestimated your existence. There was a time you thought being seen meant being safe. That if you explained yourself, they'd understand you. But people don't want understanding. They want control. And the best way to control someone is to make them doubt their own intelligence. So they did. They fed you humiliation disguised as help, superiority disguised as kindness. And you absorbed it all in silence, not because you believed them, but because you were learning how power really moved. Power doesn't explain. Power observes. Power waits. You learned the cruel truth: the world rewards the loud and forgets the patient. Until the patient stops waiting. Until the quiet one finally moves. And when that moment comes, it doesn't come with noise. It arrives like a knife through calm water. No sound, just precision. You saw through them long before they saw you. You saw the greed in their flattery, the weakness in their dominance, the fear in their laughter. Every time they called you stupid, you smiled, because they were showing you exactly where to strike. They were too busy performing intelligence to notice the silence watching from the corner. There's a different kind of intelligence, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that hides behind a blank face and a steady pulse. You carried that in you all along, the ability to endure humiliation without losing focus, to walk through mockery without reacting, to sit across from liars and make them comfortable enough to expose themselves. That's not stupidity, that's control. The rarest form of power is patience, and you mastered it under fire. You became the storm they thought was fog, the listener they thought was lost. You understood what they never will. Chaos is only dangerous to those who need certainty. You stopped needing it. You learned to move through uncertainty like a shadow, unseen, untouched, unbothered. Every setback became camouflage. Every failure, a layer of armor. You built an empire in silence while they threw stones at ghosts they didn't understand. Now, when they look at you, something feels off. They can't place it. The same face, the same quiet eyes. But the air has changed. There's calculation behind your calm. There's precision in your stillness. They don't realize it yet, but you're no longer standing where they left you. You've stepped outside the circle they trapped you in. The cage was never locked. It was psychological. And now it's them who are caged in predictability, while you've become something colder, quieter, untouchable. They still talk, trying to define you with old words that no longer fit. Quiet, weird, simple. They use the same language that once cut you, unaware it no longer draws blood. You outgrew their vocabulary. You don't argue anymore. You don't explain. You don't prove. You just move. Every silence is a warning. Every glance a calculation. You were never stupid. You were studying the human condition in real time. And now that you've learned how weakness thinks, you know exactly how to dismantle it. They thought the game was over. They were wrong. The act is over. The hand has been revealed. And the dumb one they laughed at, he's the one who wrote the script. They trained you to bow long before you ever stood tall. You were taught to smile when you wanted to scream, to apologize for breathing too loudly, to shrink just enough to fit inside the box they built for you. Every compliment was a leash disguised as kindness. Every nod of approval was a silent command: obey, blend in, stay quiet. You called it respect, they called it control. And while you spent your life trying to be good, they sharpened their power on your compliance. You didn't notice the conditioning because it didn't come with chains. It came with comfort. And comfort is the most efficient prison ever invented. They made you believe peace comes from keeping everyone happy. They taught you to fear rejection more than mediocrity, to fear loneliness more than obedience. So you became addicted to approval, mistaking it for love. The system doesn't need your brilliance. It needs your silence. It rewards those who comply, not those who question. Every rule, every custom, every polite yes was a scalpel carving away at your instincts. You weren't lazy, you were sedated. sedated by routine, by praise, by the illusion that following orders made you safe. But safe is just another word for captured. They built the idea of weakness into you like a virus. You were told that humility meant silence, that forgiveness meant surrender, that patience meant waiting for permission. They made you think morality was about being agreeable, when it was really about being manageable. You learned to mistake restraint for virtue, submission for wisdom. Every time you dimmed your voice to protect someone's comfort, a part of you vanished, and soon you couldn't tell if you were being kind or just afraid. They didn't have to force you into submission. They made you volunteer for it. Your schools didn't teach independence, they taught obedience. Memorize, repeat, don't question. Every system was designed to turn sharp minds into dull tools. Curiosity was labeled defiance. Authority was worshipped like a god. You didn't graduate with knowledge, you graduated with programming. Even your emotions were trained to obey. Smile at power, flinch at conflict, run from solitude. They wanted predictable creatures, not unpredictable thinkers. They wanted you tamed. You learned to betray yourself just to belong. You laughed when you weren't amused, agreed when you weren't convinced, and stayed quiet when your instincts screamed. And the worst part, you convinced yourself it was maturity. That's the trick. They make you police your own thoughts. They make you punish yourself for wanting more. The cage becomes invisible, and you start calling it home. You start thinking rebellion is wrong and obedience is noble. You start believing the lie that peace is the absence of friction, when in truth, it's the mastery of chaos. But underneath the layers of compliance, something ancient still stirs. A voice that doesn't ask for permission. It remembers what you were before the conditioning. Feral, aware, unbreakable. That's why the system fears silence, because silence isn't passive, it listens, it calculates, it waits. They told you to speak when spoken to, but power doesn't announce itself, it observes. The moment you stopped reacting, they lost control, because obedience requires noise, guilt, apologies, constant validation. But the still mind, that's rebellion disguised as calm. The truth is, weakness isn't a flaw, it's an infection, one passed down through generations of submission, reinforced by fear and disguised as virtue. They called you humble while harvesting your will. They called you kind while draining your fire. And one day, when you finally wake up from the hypnosis of obedience, you'll see what they feared all along, that you were never meant to serve. You were meant to notice, to question, to refuse. They taught you to kneel, but you were born to calculate. And the moment you start thinking, truly thinking, you stop being manageable. You stop being owned. And that's when the same people who called you too quiet, too soft, too slow, will look into your eyes and see the one thing they can't control anymore: awareness. They never wanted you free. They wanted you manageable. Your thoughts trimmed, your instincts muted, your hunger reprogrammed to crave validation instead of victory. From the moment you started to question, they smiled and called you different, not as praise, but as a quiet warning. Every system you've ever lived under whispered the same rule: obey quietly, and you'll be safe. You felt it in school when they punished curiosity. You saw it at work when silence earned more approval than brilliance. Every structure was designed not to kill your body, but to cage your mind, to make you doubt the power buried under your own defiance. You weren't born tame. You were taught to kneel. You remember how it began, the subtle conditioning. They called it politeness. They called it humility. But what they meant was submission. They told you to think less, to wait for permission, to make yourself smaller so others could feel larger. You obeyed because you wanted peace, but peace was never the goal. Compliance was. They praised your kindness when you agreed. They called you difficult when you resisted. The pattern repeated until obedience became instinct and rebellion felt like sin. That's how control works, not through chains, but through approval. You weren't trapped by bars. You were trapped by your own desire to be accepted. You started sensing it, that something was wrong, that the smiles weren't real, that praise had poison behind it. You saw how society rewards mediocrity and buries the extraordinary beneath the noise. The ones who question too deeply get labeled unstable. The ones who move differently get isolated. The ones who refuse to play along get erased. They fear what they can't predict, and you, the one they called foolish, reckless, strange, were unpredictable. That's why they needed you to doubt yourself. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every moment of exclusion, all tools sharpening your cage from the inside. Comfort became the leash. They gave you entertainment, endless distractions, false success. They made you believe that pleasure was freedom. They fed your ego so you'd starve your purpose. They whispered that ambition was greed, that dominance was evil, that silence was weakness. And you believed them until you started seeing the pattern. Until you realized every virtue they promoted served their convenience, not your evolution. They told you to stay soft in a world built to devour softness. They told you to be kind to those who would never hesitate to destroy you. They called that morality. You called it peace. But it was surrender. They disguised fear as wisdom. They taught you that risk was danger, that failure was death, that being unseen meant being safe. But safety is the first stage of decay. The mind that fears pain becomes addicted to stillness. You've seen people live their whole lives inside invisible cages, whispering the same excuses. It's just the way things are. I don't want trouble. Maybe next year. Those phrases are tombstones. They mark where power once lived. You weren't meant to live cautiously. You were meant to move like fire, consuming everything that tries to contain you. And now you see it. The faces around you aren't free. They're actors in a play they don't know they're performing, each one chained by approval, by fear, by comfort. You walk among them, and their eyes tell you they've already surrendered. They gossip to feel powerful. They obey to feel safe. They laugh at rebellion because rebellion exposes their submission. You watch in silence because silence has become your weapon. You're no longer part of the flock. You're the shadow that studies it. The truth is simple, brutal, undeniable. They never wanted you smart. They wanted you silent. They never feared your weakness. They feared the moment you'd stop pretending to be weak. And now you're here, quiet, aware, dangerous. The cage isn't broken yet, but the lock has turned. And the ones who once smiled at your obedience are starting to feel something they've never felt around you before. Fear. They laughed when you went quiet, thought you were broken, thought the silence meant defeat. But that's where they made their first mistake, because silence isn't absence, it's accumulation. Every word you didn't say became a blade. Every reaction you buried became a weapon. You stopped defending yourself not because you ran out of arguments, but because you realized truth doesn't need noise. It just needs timing. You watched them, measured them, memorized their tells. You learned who moves out of ego, who acts out of fear, and who hides behind charm. You saw the masks shift, the smiles twitch, the small betrayals that reveal everything. You started collecting data like a spy in your own war, because you finally understood. People expose themselves when they think you're not watching. They used to call your restraint weakness. Speak up, they said. Defend yourself. But you learned that every defense is an admission. That when you fight every battle, you tell the enemy exactly where your wounds are. So you stopped bleeding for attention. You started healing in silence. You realized the strongest move isn't striking first. It's waiting until no one sees you coming. Power lives in patience. The world calls it coldness, but only the cold survive the storm. You stopped trying to prove your worth to people addicted to misunderstanding you. You stopped running after validation that was never pure. Instead, you learned to vanish in plain sight, to let the world underestimate you while you rebuilt behind closed doors. You started moving like a ghost in daylight. Every smile became a disguise. Every word was chosen like a sniper's bullet. You no longer needed to be liked, you needed to be effective. You became allergic to noise, to drama, to people who talk louder than they think. You realized that chaos thrives on attention and silence kills it. You stopped reacting, stopped explaining, stopped feeding the fire that kept you trapped. And the moment you went still, you saw how desperate they became to drag you back into the noise. Because silence terrifies those who have no control over it. It mirrors them back to themselves. It reveals their weakness. They used to think you were predictable, an open book, easy to read, easy to manipulate. But now your energy confuses them. You don't announce your next move. You don't flinch, even when they push every button. You've learned the art of emotional invisibility. To them, you look detached. But underneath that calm is calculation. Underneath that quiet is preparation. You became what they fear most, a mystery they can't decode. And nothing is more dangerous than a person who reveals nothing. Because when you no longer explain yourself, People start writing their own stories about you, and that's how you win, by letting their assumptions destroy them. You've stopped chasing fairness in an unfair world. You've stopped giving mercy to those who mistake it for weakness. You realize that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. Now you move with precision, every step deliberate, every silence strategic. You've learned that revenge isn't a loud act, it's the quiet success they never see coming. You became the calm before the strike, the pause before the collapse, the moment when the world forgets you exist, until it's too late. They still talk, they still underestimate you, but the difference is, now you let them. You let them play their game while you build your empire beneath the noise. You move through rooms like smoke, unnoticed, unstoppable, untouchable. You know what they don't? That silence is not the absence of power. It's the perfection of it. You no longer explain, you execute. You no longer react, you observe. You no longer chase, you calculate. Because you've learned the oldest law of survival: noise exposes you. But silence makes you invisible. And the invisible always wins. They hurt you because they thought you'd break. They wanted to watch you collapse, to see that flicker in your eyes go out. Every betrayal was a test. A knife slid under your ribs just to see if you'd finally bleed out and stop trying. But you didn't. You stayed silent. You burned quietly. And in that silence, something inside you shifted. Pain didn't destroy you. It rewired you. Every heartbreak soldered your nerves into steel. Every rejection taught you to stop begging for doors to open and start learning how to build your own. You started realizing that pain isn't punishment, it's programming. The fire that tried to erase you instead carved you into someone they can't even look in the eyes anymore. They think you're numb. You're not. You just stopped reacting. Because pain taught you what attention really costs. Every time you screamed, they fed on it. Every time you showed emotion, they won. So you went quiet. You stopped giving them the privilege of seeing you bleed. You stopped narrating your suffering to people who were never listening. You became fluent in silence, and silence became armor. You started moving differently, not because you stopped caring, but because you learned that every ounce of energy spent on the past was fuel stolen from your future. That's when you began to see pain for what it truly is. A code ancient and merciless, teaching you how to survive in a world built to break gentle minds. You stopped asking why. That was the first step. Because there is no why, only what now. Pain showed you how to adapt without explanation. It stripped you of illusions until all that was left was instinct. You learned that nobody is coming to save you. No closure is coming, no apology is enough. And yet that realization didn't destroy you. It liberated you. Pain ripped away your dependence on fairness, sympathy, and luck. It made you ruthless in your awareness. It taught you that every scar you hide carries a manual for power, if you're willing to read it. Pain became the teacher no comfort could ever replace. You began turning inward. You started seeing betrayal not as cruelty, but as data. Rejection became calibration. Failure became information. That's what they never told you. Pain is the most honest feedback in existence. It doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It tells you, with brutal precision, where your weakness still lies. And when you finally stop running from it, you can turn it into strategy. You start using the same pain that once froze you as a compass pointing toward your strength. Every time someone doubted you, you gained a map of what they fear you could become. Every insult was a leaked document from your enemy, revealing what threatens them most about you. You don't chase revenge anymore. You learned that revenge is noise, and noise exposes the hunter. You want something far colder now. Evolution. You no longer waste energy proving who you are. You'd rather disappear, rebuild in silence, and return when every weakness has been reforged into precision. You've learned that the most terrifying thing you can do to those who hurt you is to outlast them, to stay calm when they expect rage, to rise when they swear you're finished. Because nothing unsettles the world more than the one who was buried and came back without mercy or noise, only clarity. Your scars don't make you human anymore. They make you dangerous. They mean you've seen the darkness, sat inside it, and made peace with it. They mean you no longer fear the fire. You are the fire. Pain stopped being something that happened to you and became something that serves you. And now when they look at you, they sense it. The stillness, the focus, the quiet threat. They see the version of you that pain built, and they know deep down that they created their own undoing. Because the one they tried to break has learned how to turn every wound into a weapon. They thought you were harmless, the quiet one, the background noise in a world obsessed with shouting. But silence isn't weakness, it's surveillance. While they screamed for validation, you watched pattern. While they chased attention, you memorized their hunger. You learned who betrays under pressure, who panics when ignored, who bleeds when challenged. You didn't play dumb, you played invisible. And that's what terrified them the most. Because the moment they stopped seeing you, you started seeing everything. Every false smile, every masked intention, every hidden weapon disguised as kindness. You began to understand that survival isn't about being liked. It's about being unreadable. The predator never roars before it kills. It moves through the noise without leaving a trace. You became that silence. You became the calculation behind every calm breath. There was a time you wanted fairness. You believed in effort, in honesty, in being understood. But the world doesn't reward honesty. It dissects it. It doesn't honor loyalty, it exploits it. You realize that fairness is a story told by those who fear competition. So you stopped playing by their rules. You learned to sit in the same room with your enemies and make them comfortable enough to confess. You learned that being underestimated is the purest form of freedom. When they think you're beneath them, they never guard their throats. Now you move different. Every word you speak has a purpose. Every silence has a price. You don't argue, you observe. You don't react, you record. The ones who mocked your calmness now feel it like a storm waiting to happen. Because power isn't about aggression, it's about control. The calmest person in the room is always the one who decides how it ends. You became that presence. The quiet storm that shifts the temperature when you walk in. You stop trying to explain your intention. Explanation is for the powerless. You don't justify what they can't comprehend. You don't crave recognition. Recognition exposes you. The real masters of strategy never step onto the stage. They pull strings from behind the curtain. You let them think they're leading, and when they finally realize the truth, it's already too late. They're walking inside your design, mistaking your patience for weakness. But patience is camouflage. It's the art of letting the world exhaust itself before you strike once, with precision. There's something ancient in you now, something primal, like a wolf that's seen too many winters to fear hunger. You don't chase, you wait. You let opportunity circle back, limping. You've become fluent in silence, the language of power. Because true control isn't about force, it's about knowing when not to use it. You can end someone's illusion of dominance with a single glance, a single pause, a single truth spoken too late for them to recover. They still whisper your name, trying to understand when the shift happened. They think you changed. You didn't. You just stopped pretending. You stopped apologizing for your intelligence, for your intuition, for the darkness that made you sharp. You became the reflection they can't look at for too long because it exposes everything they're hiding. You're not the fool in their story anymore. You're the silence between their lies, the kind that makes them nervous, the kind that makes them confess. This is the era of no mercy, not cruelty, clarity, the kind that separates noise from purpose, the kind that walks away from manipulation and leaves it starving. You've mastered the art of restraint, the precision of timing, the discipline of emotion. You are not chasing validation. You are observing evolution. Every scar has turned into a map, every betrayal into a blueprint. And now every move you make is deliberate. You've stopped reacting to the world. The world reacts to you. They called you quiet. But they never understood that silence was never your weakness. It was your weapon. While they filled rooms with noise and empty laughter, you were studying patterns, memorizing tones, watching the way power moved between words. You saw how people begged for attention, mistaking visibility for control. They thought you were passive. You were calculating. Every insult, every dismissal, every time they underestimated you became data. You learned that the loudest voices reveal the most, and the ones who speak last always own the room. You stopped reacting. That was the first evolution. The moment you no longer needed to explain yourself, you became untouchable. Because the world feeds on your reactions. It thrives on your panic, your rush to defend, your need to prove. When you went silent, you cut off their supply. You became a mirror that reflected their own insecurity back at them. People started feeling uneasy around you, not because you changed, but because they could no longer read you. The quiet mind terrifies those who live in noise. It exposes how small their chaos really is. There was a time you feared losing people. Now you watch them walk away and feel nothing. Detachment isn't coldness, it's power refined through pain. Every betrayal taught you to see behind masks. Every false smile became an education in deceit. You began recognizing how easily humans trade loyalty for convenience, how easily they worship status while betraying substance. But you no longer seek loyalty, you test for alignment. You no longer beg for honesty, you observe consistency. You stopped needing validation the day you realized attention is the cheapest currency in existence. Now your mind moves like smoke, unseen, unpredictable, impossible to contain. You think slower, deeper, cleaner. You no longer rush to be understood. You study how others expose themselves trying to explain. The quiet mind is not empty. It's strategic. It doesn't chase answers, it builds them. You've learned to weaponize patience, to let others speak long enough to show you where they're weak. You wait while they burn their energy, trying to impress you. You sit still while they unravel, and when you finally move, it's deliberate, surgical, unstoppable. You used to crave peace, now you create it, because peace, you discovered, is not the absence of conflict, it's the mastery of control. You decide what gets your reaction. You decide what deserves your presence. That control unsettles people. They mistake it for arrogance, but they don't understand that composure is a form of dominance. The calmest person in the room always dictates the temperature. You've become that person, the one who doesn't flinch, doesn't explain, doesn't need to win arguments, because your silence already does. You walk through the world differently now. You notice details others overlook, the way power hides in pauses, the way eyes shift before lies, the tremor in the voice of those pretending confident. You've stopped seeking enemies because you know most destroy themselves given enough time. Your revenge is patience. Your success is restraint. Your mind no longer bends to impulse, it bends reality itself. That's what true transformation feels like, not loud victories, but quiet control. They still whisper about you. They wonder what changed. They sense danger in your stillness, authority in your silence. You don't correct them. You let them guess. Because the moment they realize how much you know and how little you reveal, it's already too late. You're not the same person who played dumb, who begged for understanding, who feared being underestimated. You've evolved beyond needing to be seen. The storm they mocked has become the calm they fear. Comfort kills, silence wins, weakness bleeds. And now, so does anyone who mistakes your silence for surrender.